It was supposed to be just another quiet lunch. The kind of afternoon where the sun rests gently on the shoulders of Los Angeles, casting a golden hue over palm trees, marble storefronts, and outdoor cafes. In a city where celebrity sightings are just part of the backdrop, few things cause a stir. But on this particular day, a single hat turned heads and turned an entire restaurant upside down. Barron Trump, now a tall and composed young man in his late teens, had no agenda that afternoon. No entourage, no press, just a quiet moment to himself. After spending the morning reading in his family's West Coast residence, he decided to step out for lunch. Not just anywhere. He chose LA Terrace, an elite restaurant tucked in the heart of Beverly Hills, known for its sophistication, discretion, and clientele that reads like the guest list of an awards gala. He'd been there before. The staff knew his face. Some even admired his quiet nature, the way he moved with grace, never making a scene. But today was different. Because today, Barron Trump walked through those glass doors wearing something unmistakable, a bright red, Make America Great Again cap. To him, it wasn't meant as a statement. It wasn't rebellion, nor a provocation. The hat, much like the suit he wore, was just a piece of who he was, a symbol of heritage, belief, or maybe just comfort. He wore it the way some wear a sports team's logo or a favorite band's t-shirt. No second thought. The hostess, polished and polite, welcomed him with her usual warmth. She didn't flinch. She didn't pause. Perhaps she understood who he was. Or perhaps she just saw another young man looking for a meal. She led him to a quiet corner table where natural light pooled against cream-colored walls, and conversations were hushed enough to let the clink of glasses sing. Barron sat, removed his earbuds, and opened the menu. His movements were deliberate, calm, that of someone used to being watched but unbothered by it. What he didn't notice, or maybe chose not to notice, were the murmurs. A man at the next table whispered to his partner. Two waiters by the bar exchanged glances. One of them pulled out his phone, not to take a photo but to text. The message would never be made public, but its consequences would unfold within minutes. And then he appeared. The manager of LA Terrace, a man in his mid-40s, sharp jaw, sharper suit, stepped into view like an actor hitting his mark. His eyes locked onto Barron with a mix of tension and resolve. He walked straight toward the young man's table, voice already rising before he stopped. "Excuse me," he said, loud enough for heads to turn. "We have a policy against political apparel here. I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat." The room stilled. Conversations faded into silence. All eyes turned to the corner. Barron looked up, not startled, but clearly surprised. He paused, took out his earbuds, and placed them neatly beside his water glass. "I wasn't aware of any policy like that," he said. Calm, respectful, not defiant, but not yielding either. "It's written in our code of conduct," the manager insisted, gesturing vaguely toward the entrance. "We want this to be a neutral space for all guests." Barron glanced around. Some patrons averted their eyes, pretending to be absorbed in their wine. Others stared unabashedly, hungry for the drama. "I'm not trying to cause any trouble," he replied. His voice remained steady. "I'm just here for lunch." But the manager had drawn a line. "You need to take the hat off, or I'll have to ask you to leave." There was a beat, a moment when time seemed to slow. And then, without drama, without a raised voice, Barron stood. "If that's how you feel," he said simply, "then I'll leave." And with that, he pushed back his chair, picked up his phone and earbuds, and walked out. His glass of water remained untouched. The room behind him sat in stunned silence. No one said a word, but everyone felt it. Something more than a hat had just been removed from that space. Something had shifted. Something had begun. Outside, the sunlight still bathed the street in warmth, but for Barron Trump, everything suddenly felt colder. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the restaurant door closing softly behind him. There was no angry slam, no final word, just a soft click and the dull hum of the city returning to life. But inside him, something stirred. Not rage, not humiliation, just a heavy, quiet kind of disappointment. He adjusted the brim of his red hat as a light breeze tousled his hair. The gesture wasn't defiant. It was reflective, reaffirming. He'd been raised to treat others with respect, even in the face of disagreement. And yet, in that moment, he couldn't help but feel the sting of being reduced to an accessory on his head. He walked, not far, just a few blocks, past boutiques and luxury cars, past people who didn't know or didn't care about what had just happened inside LA Terrace. He found a small public park, almost hidden between two buildings, with a weathered bench under the shade of a sycamore tree. He sat, pulled out his phone. The first message was to his mother. Just a quick, simple note. Not to worry her, just letting her know. Then came a few texts to close friends. Got kicked out of a restaurant for the hat. He wasn't looking for pity. He wasn't even sure why he was telling them. Maybe he just needed to know he wasn't imagining the weight of it. The replies came quickly. That's insane. They shouldn't have treated you like that. You handled that better than I would have. You were calm. I'd have filmed the whole thing. He chuckled lightly at that last one, but it didn't lift the feeling in his chest. Barron wasn't angry at the manager. Not really. He understood that people had strong feelings, that the world had become a place where everything, even a color, a phrase, a cap, could set someone off. But wasn't the point of neutrality to accept all views, not ban them? He looked up. The park was quiet. A jogger passed, earbuds in, lost in her own world. A little girl fed pigeons nearby while her mother scrolled through her phone. And then it hit him, not a thought, but a seed of one. This didn't have to end here. He didn't want to post about it. He didn't want to rant on social media or call for a boycott. That would be too easy, too loud, too divisive. What if he turned this into something that wasn't about him, but about everyone? A moment of rejection, transformed into a message of inclusion. He stood, pulling out his phone again. This time, not to text, to call. Hey, he said into the receiver. I need your help with something. It was the beginning of an idea, one rooted not in protest, but in purpose. Meanwhile, back inside the restaurant, the air inside LA Terrace had shifted. It wasn't something you could see, but you could feel it like static before a storm. Conversations resumed, but softer. The clinking of cutlery no longer masked the tension that had been left behind. At the bar, the manager scrolled through his phone, trying to appear unbothered. But the screen told a different story. A blurry photo of Barron, taken by someone in the restaurant, was already on social media. The caption was short and biting. They kicked Barron Trump out over a hat. Freedom of expression? Guess not. Another post followed minutes later. Then another. Hashtags began to pop up. Hashtag MAGA incident. Hashtag freedom to wear. Hashtag a laugh aloud. A waiter approached him, hesitant. Sir, do you think that was a good idea? The manager didn't look up. We have a policy, he muttered. It's about keeping the space neutral. But he wasn't bothering anyone, the waiter replied, almost in a whisper. He was polite, just sitting there. The manager waved him off. We can't make exceptions. But even as he spoke, his words fell hollow. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't just about policy. It was personal. It was fear. And now it was spiraling. Outside, the posts spread like wildfire. Some defended the restaurant's right to enforce its dress code. Others were livid, calling the act discriminatory. Influencers picked it up. Local news began making calls. By the time Barron got home, his phone was buzzing again, not with sympathy, but with attention. Reporters, friends, strangers. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened his leather-bound notebook, the one he used for ideas, for the quiet thoughts he rarely shared with the world. He began to write, not about the restaurant, not about the hat, but about how easily we turn away from each other, how quickly we choose sides instead of seeking understanding, and how maybe, just maybe, this moment could be something more than a headline. It could be the beginning of something better. The next morning, the quiet street in front of a terrace looked anything but ordinary. Trucks pulled up at the curb. Volunteers unloaded tables, banners, folding chairs, and strings of soft glow lights. A small stage was being assembled just feet from the restaurant's entrance, its planks creaking under the weight of speakers and microphone stands. Curious onlookers paused as they passed by, their expressions shifting from confusion to curiosity. Some took photos, others stayed to ask questions. At the center of it all stood Barron Trump, not flanked by bodyguards, not hidden behind handlers, just himself, clipboard in hand, phone tucked between his shoulder and cheek. "Yes, the mural booth goes over there. Near the shade," he said, pointing calmly. "And we'll need 3 tables for the charities, 1 for youth mentorship, 1 for open dialogue programs, and 1 for the arts collective." It had only been 24 hours since he walked out of that restaurant. Dismissed not for his words or behavior, but for a hat. But in that short time, he turned an uncomfortable personal moment into something undeniably bigger. He didn't want pity. He didn't want outrage. What he wanted, what he insisted on, was connection. That morning, Barron had sent out personal invitations to community leaders, nonprofit organizers, local schools, and youth groups. He named the event United We Stand, Building Bridges, Not Walls. It wasn't a protest. It was a celebration of unity, of listening, of growth. His message was simple. Disagreement doesn't have to mean division, and silence doesn't have to follow discomfort. By noon, the scene was alive with motion. Food trucks lined the street, serving everything from vegan bowls to old-school tacos. A jazz trio played upbeat classics on the small stage, while volunteers handed out water bottles and painted faces. Children decorated a massive community mural, while adults browsed booths supporting mental health programs and inclusion training workshops. It was the kind of energy LA hadn't felt in a while, real, unfiltered, grounded in something good. Barron moved through the crowd with quiet confidence. He shook hands. He posed for photos. But more than anything, he listened. To people who had stories. To people who had questions. To people who, just a day ago, might have dismissed him based on a headline or a hat. At exactly 2 p.m., he stepped onto the stage. The jazz band quieted. The hum of conversation dimmed. Dozens of people turned to face him. Not just attendees, but reporters, influencers, and notably, a few diners seated awkwardly behind the restaurant's large glass windows. Barron took a deep breath and began. "Yesterday, I was asked to leave a restaurant because of a hat," he said, his voice steady but firm. "And that's okay. I respect their right to enforce a policy, even if I don't agree with it." He paused, eyes scanning the crowd. But what struck me wasn't being asked to leave. It was what it represented. We've become so quick to shut each other down, so eager to divide. We're forgetting how to talk, how to truly listen. A ripple of applause followed. He continued, "This event isn't about politics. It's not about me. It's about us. About finding space for conversation in a world that too often chooses conflict." The crowd erupted again, louder this time. "The funds we raise today will go toward programs that do just that. Bring people together. Bridge gaps. Remind us that no matter our differences, we belong to each other." By the time he stepped off the stage, it wasn't just applause that followed him. It was respect. From strangers. From skeptics. From people who hadn't expected such grace. Back inside LA Terrace, through the tall windows, the restaurant staff couldn't help but look out. The once bustling dining room felt strangely empty. A few tables were occupied, but even those guests seemed distracted, half-turned toward the music and movement outside. The manager stood at the window, arms crossed. He hadn't spoken much all day. He kept telling himself it would blow over, that the social media storm would pass. But it hadn't. The restaurant's official Instagram had been flooded with thousands of comments, some supportive, many critical. Bookings had dropped. Regulars had canceled reservations. And most unsettling of all, his own staff had begun to question his decision. A waiter approached quietly. "Some of us are thinking of stepping outside. Just for a few minutes," he said. "The event looks incredible." The manager didn't reply, just nodded vaguely. But inside, he felt the weight of something shift. Not guilt, not yet, but maybe doubt. A turning point. As the sun began to dip behind the buildings, casting golden shadows across the event, something unexpected happened. The doors to LA Terrace opened. The manager stepped outside. He hesitated for a moment, hands tucked into his pockets. His posture, once commanding, now uncertain. People noticed, a few gasps, a few turned heads. Barron was mid-conversation with a group of volunteers when he spotted him. He didn't freeze. He didn't look away. Instead, he smiled, slightly, and took a step forward. The crowd slowly quieted, giving the two men space, not out of fear or tension, but out of respect. Something real was happening. The manager approached and extended a hand. "I'd like to talk," he said, voice low. Barron took his hand. "Of course," he replied. They walked off to the edge of the event side by side. Two people who had every reason to remain strangers, or worse, opponents, now meeting as equals. The conversation that followed would surprise everyone. But what mattered most wasn't what they said. It was the fact that they were talking at all. The crowd watched in silence as Barron Trump and the restaurant manager stepped aside, just far enough from the buzz of the event to speak freely. From a distance, it looked like a quiet moment, two figures in the afternoon light, caught in conversation. But to those who had followed the story, this wasn't just small talk. This was reconciliation in real time. The manager's face, usually composed, now held a trace of unease. His eyes flicked to the crowd, then back to Barron. "I need to start by saying, I didn't handle yesterday well," he began, his voice low. "I thought I was protecting the atmosphere of my restaurant. But the truth is I was reacting out of fear. And I judged you." Barron listened without interrupting, his expression open but unreadable. "I didn't know what to expect after you left," the manager continued. "I thought it would blow over. But watching what you've done here today, it's humbling. You could have retaliated or turned it into a fight. But instead, you built something." There was a pause. Barron nodded slowly. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong," he said gently. "Thank you for saying that." A subtle shift happened in the manager's posture, as if a weight had been lifted, even if just slightly. "I want to help," he said. "If there's anything I or the restaurant can do, donate, host, support, just say the word." Barron looked out at the crowd, at the food stalls, the music, the children painting, the booths supporting causes from mental health to mentorship. "I think the best way to contribute," he said after a moment, "is to reflect on how we treat people. Policies are fine, but when they push kindness aside, they fail. Maybe LA Terrace could host an event like this. Show people what neutrality really means, not avoidance, but inclusion." The manager blinked, surprised. But then, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That's actually a great idea." They shook hands again, this time with warmth, not performance, not pressure, just two human beings meeting in the middle. Behind them, the crowd had been watching, and when they saw the handshake, they erupted, not with forced applause, but with the kind that rises from something real, something earned. The final speech. As the sun began its descent, casting long amber shadows across the street, Barron took the stage one last time. The energy was softer now, peaceful, but still alive. He looked out at the faces gathered, some familiar, some not. People who'd come for different reasons, but stayed for one. "This has been one of the most meaningful days of my life," he began. "Not because of what happened yesterday, but because of what we chose to do today." He glanced toward the restaurant where, just the day before, he'd been asked to leave. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next. Do we double down, or do we grow? What happened yesterday could have divided us, but today proved something powerful. Even when we disagree, we can still find common ground." He paused, letting the words settle. "This isn't about politics. It's about people, about listening, about remembering that disagreement doesn't mean disrespect." He closed his speech with a simple line, one that would be quoted, shared, and remembered. "Unity isn't just possible, it's necessary." The crowd roared with applause. A mix of hope, emotion, and relief surged through the block like a wave. Inside LA Terrace, the dining room was quieter than ever, but the energy outside seemed to seep in through the walls. A few diners had left mid-meal to join the event. Staff members who had stayed inside now leaned against the windows, watching. The manager returned, stepping in through the same doors he had once stood in with a raised voice and rigid rules. Now, he moved differently. He gathered his team. "We're going to be part of this," he said. "We'll host the next one, free of charge. And this time, we'll serve everyone with respect." There were no cheers, no grand declarations, just a collective nod, a silent agreement. It was a start. 1 week later, the story made national headlines, not for its outrage, but for its outcome. From conflict to compassion, Barron Trump turns incident into movement. That sparks change, not outrage. Footage of the handshake, the fundraiser, and Barron's speech were shared across platforms. Influencers, journalists, and even political opponents agreed on one thing. It was one of the rare moments where grace won over aggression. Donations continued to pour in long after the event ended. Dialogue programs launched in local schools. And LA terrace, once the subject of heated backlash, saw a resurgence. Not in luxury, but in purpose. The message that remained. In a city built on image, authenticity had cut through the noise. A young man, singled out over a symbol, had chosen connection over conflict. And in doing so, he reminded an entire city, and maybe even a nation, that we don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes we just have to listen.